Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to the Sociology of Media Voices Series. And today we have as our special guest Dr. Matthew Harrison. He is an experienced educator, researcher and digital creator with a keen passion for utilising technology to enhance social learning and inclusion. He has taught in Australia, South Korea and the United Kingdom at primary, secondary and tertiary levels. Matthew is currently coordinating Autism Intervention within the Masters of Learning Intervention and is the co-director of the student experience at the University of Melbourne's Graduate School of Education. His research primarily focuses on inclusive education and the effective use of digital technologies as teaching and learning tools. As a gamer, he has a particular interest in digital games-based learning and intervention. Matthew's PhD thesis examined how cooperative video games can be used as spaces for developing social capabilities for autistic with disabilities and neurological differences. Building from this innovative research, he founded Next Level Social Skills, an inclusive community for neurodiverse children that uses cooperative video games to build confidence and social capabilities. He is also the founder of Hatt Designs, developing education apps for tablets and smartphones. Let's now welcome Dr. Matthew Harrison. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, Matt, welcome. So tell us, how did you get involved into your passion?
Well, thank you, Ricky. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's very exciting to be here. I'm a gamer, growing up playing games, and for me, that's how I learned a lot of my social, I developed, I guess, what is often termed social skills, but like collaborative skills is a way I prefer to look at it. So there's ways of how we can work together and negotiate and find solutions. I learned that playing with family and friends on an old 286 computer. I don't know if you remember the 286 computers.
Yes, I do. I got one.
It's great. Oh, brilliant. That's fantastic. We had one keyboard. We had this rickety old mouse, but then we have sort of like 10 kids standing around. We're very close to school, our house. Yeah. So we'd have kids after school, particularly in secondary school, coming over to our house, and the idea of taking turns and negotiating, but also giving each other, I guess, that sort of emotional support as you play together. Mm. And that's really, I've always been a gamer. And then when I was working with some kids as a teacher, and these kids were wonderful kids, but the school system wasn't really working for them. So I started trying to use games as a way to connect with them and get them excited about coming to school, engaged. And then I could actually build from that and use that as a starting point. So that's really how I got into this idea of using games as tools for teaching and learning.
Wow. And Matt, now let's take one step back. You went to school. What got you interested in becoming a teacher?
Oh, that's a good question. Ricky, I actually started off doing a degree in international studies, and then I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I had an internship at a school in Vietnam called 15 May School, and I had a brilliant youth ambassador as our program coordinator there through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade program, and some wonderful Vietnamese teachers. And I started off on the admin side, and I was organising a soccer tournament, and it was fun, but I got asked to cover a class one day. And they said, oh, the English teacher is sick, they can't come, could you come and co-teach with a Vietnamese teacher? And I said, oh yeah, I guess I can. And I absolutely loved it. And both of my parents were teachers. They warned me away. They were like, oh, it's the kids are wonderful, but the system is getting more and more onerous. And there's a lot of bureaucracy, and sometimes there's politics. So they're both like, oh, maybe try to find something else. But when I started working with the kids, I thought, geez, this is good. I really enjoyed it. And over my internship, I did less and less organising of this soccer tournament and more classes, teaching classes. And for me, it really sparked this idea that this is something that I was well suited to, something that I felt comfortable doing, and something I really enjoyed. It made me, get up with a smile on my face every day. And I am so grateful to that school, because I probably wouldn't have been a teacher if I hadn't done that internship and hadn't been given that trust just to go into a classroom. It doesn't happen now, but just to start teaching. And it was a wonderful experience, and that really sparked my interest in this space.
Okay. And so when you began teaching, reflecting back on, say, the first year or two of your teaching experience, what was the use of technology like in those classrooms that you were in?
This is another interesting one. I came back after my time in Vietnam. I had a gap year in Canada, and I came back and did my DIP teach, it was a 6-month or 8-month accelerated program, which they don't offer anymore. And it was sort of like a very, very quick rushed certificate. I made some really good friends there, and I did learn a lot. But then my first year out, I actually went to South Korea.
Oh.
I did a year of co-teaching in South Korea, and using technology there, it was very different because you had 35 kids in a classroom, and there was much more of that sort of teacher at the front, directed teaching. But I had this wonderfully dynamic Korean co-teacher, and she'd been teaching English for years, and she said, let's have a go at doing something different. What did you learn? And I said, I'm a graduate. This is my first year. I'm happy to follow your lead. And she's like, no, let's do something. And she was wonderfully eccentric and said, let's do something different. Let's change it up. So we started using things like we had the projector at the front, but we started using, and this is pre-iPads even. So we had a laptop, but we had the activity stations where kids could go around from activity to activity rather than just rote work. And that was very different from what they'd been doing. But having those idea of stations and everyone changing stations every 15 minutes, and the idea of students doing multimedia presentations about something they wanted to talk about and that wasn't attached to any assessment was a radical thing. The idea that there wasn't a formalized, there was feedback for sure, and it did work towards an assessment piece, but the idea that this was low stakes was very, is a little bit different, I think, culturally. And again, I was just starting out. So technology was I was just starting to experiment with how we could use it to get students to be able to express themselves. So that was very early on. And then I came back to Melbourne and started using games. And that's, I think, when I really found a place for technology in my classroom.
And with your passion for games and your teaching, did you work in special schools in your teaching settings?
I did. I taught in mainstream schools, inclusive schools on paper for my first 8 years of my teaching, and that includes my time in South Korea and the UK. When I came home from the UK, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was feeling a little bit tired from teaching. And I talk about the 5-year burnout cycle. After 5 years, many teachers feel just exhausted and burnt out. And I was feeling like I was probably my 7th or 8th year of teaching. And I needed something different. And I just happened to fall into a special development school, which is a school for kids who identify with complex needs. Now, I know this is quite a controversial space. And I know IQ, there are some critiques of IQ which I think are really important to make. These were kids who on paper had tested sub 50 for their IQ. So they're placed in what's called a special development school. A lot of them had complex needs manifesting from things like a physical disability. And so that was, again, like learning to teach again. And it was really the first time that I really challenged a lot of my own assumptions around education and around inclusion and around, I guess, just the challenges faced by Australians with disability and neurological differences. Just working in that space, so I got to learn from a lot of my students. and some wonderful teachers as well. And yeah, it really did change my practice for the better, I think.
How did you find, because as a teacher myself working in special schools, one of the things I noticed was that some teachers really struggled sometimes, especially with the technology, because the focus of the tool being the digital, I call the artifact of trying to engage the student. How did you, because for me it was the love of seeing someone thrive, but how did you sort of make a connection with, okay, this is a device, this is the person, and sort of enmesh all that together to where you, with your research? Was there a time that a flash bulb came to you as you were teaching and thought, oh, I've got it?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Technology is a tool, and it really, what really matters is the relationship between the teacher and the student, and how the technology is positioned by the teacher and by the student, in the sense that technology by itself, it can have affordances, it can create opportunities, but it's really the teacher and the student, their relationship. So for the students that I worked with, often technology was essential. That was their communication devices. It's how they used augmentative and assistive technology to be able to have their voices heard. But the teacher has to be listening to hear those voices. So the technology can create opportunities for that student, but the teacher also has to be, it's really the teacher is a central role, in the sense that they're the one that has to be able to use that technology in a way that's meaningful for the student. And I think sometimes that's what's missed, is I think that technology will solve every problem, but at the end of the day, it's about our relationship with our students and how we can harness those affordances from the technology to be able to optimize those relationships, optimize the academic learning, optimize this social learning. And it's a two-way street, of course, because we learn from our students as well.
Absolutely. And now stepping into the role as you are an educator of future teachers, especially in the specialised area of learning intervention. And that's something that's interesting. Can you maybe explain that a little bit? What is like the course that you coordinate?
So I'm part of... Yeah, so I coordinate Autism Intervention, which is part of the Master of Learning Intervention. I'll just move across, wrong way. There we go. And that's at the University of Melbourne, Graduate School of Education. So we used to teach special education, and that was really focused on those children that had those labels of disability and how we could support them. And it came from a historical perspective and there were some real people I really admire, like some of the founders of the Australian Association for Special Education. There were kids who just weren't getting educated. They were seen as, they could not, the idea was that they couldn't learn. And a group of really passionate teachers in the 70s came together in the 60s and 70s and said, every kid should be able to learn. And so as a university, we were teaching this it was a degree in special education focused on these learners. But then about 2013 and 2014, Associate Professor Shirley Pode, who used to be with us, had this idea that we're actually more than that. We're about learning intervention, because there are students who don't have these labels but need that wraparound support, who need that sort of, they're outside the typical patterns of development, if you want to use that language, for whatever reason, but they don't have these labels. So what it's really about learning intervention is supporting every kid who doesn't fit, a stereotypical pattern of development, and that's most kids. The average is 2. By means, there's kids who need additional support in one area but not another, and we know kids are complex, so we really wanted to reflect that in our course. The fact is, we're not just working with kids with diagnosed disabilities and neurological differences, although they are very important to us, but it's helping all those kids who, for whatever reason, need additional support.
Oh, that's wonderful. And what do you find as one of the areas that students who go into your course that they find the most challenging?
I think that's a really good question. Look, I think it's the implementation. And this is the trick, is we know there's a lot of research, and that research is around, you know, supports and interventions you can use, around how to research around eliciting student voice and how you can act on that and enact student agency in your course. That's actually putting the rubber to the road, so to speak, how we can actually get it out there in schools. So teachers, when they're actually going on placements, which they do as part of the Master of Learning intervention, they actually have to implement and monitor and evaluate some sort of support or intervention plan. And when we say intervention, it's also often intervening in the environment. It's not changing the kids, it's changing the environment to better meet the needs of that child. And often when you're on placement, there's that relationship with your supervising teacher where they might have done something the same way for so many years. So how do you have those conversations about, do you know what? There's some research that says this might work, or that this element of student voice is really important, or this strategy has been found to be really effective for this group of students in the past. How can we try this? And that's what they find really difficult sometimes. But I think it's such an important part of change, is that we can have those difficult conversations, we can be a little bit uncomfortable, and through that discomfort, we can learn.
And that shows also that passion that comes from that, because I can just speak from my own experience, having working in one class when I had 2 or 3 students who really got excited when I got excited because they were able to do something in such a way, and it was a piece of artwork, and the fact that they were able to then in their way articulate what that piece of artwork meant to them. And I remember capturing on a video, because to me, I thought, oh my God, this is what I would want in any classroom, is to have that student engagement and to feel that genuineness, euphoria you get when you see someone at first maybe struggling or not engaging, to all of a sudden feel so proud that they've achieved something. And that comes from teaching, the core of teaching, that sometimes we don't hear that. And that's one of the, I guess, the blessings working in that setting. So now let's thread our journey. You've worked in schools and you went further. And so what prompted you, Matt, to then pursue further studies in education?
Yeah. I think I'm a bit of a nerd, Ricky. In the nicest possible way. I'm an absolute education geek. I love reading research, and I love talking about this stuff. And I think, and look, I think we all are. If you're in teaching, you obviously love working with kids, and you always want to do better. And I think most teachers now love the idea of thinking about how we can do better as a profession. And so for me personally, I was running a games-based learning group every Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see kids in that group doing things and showing leadership and being confident and articulating things that they wouldn't do in a group science experiment, or they wouldn't do in PE class. So this is a year 1-2 class. And I really wanted to find out what was it about this Friday lunchtime games group that I was running for year 1-2 students that really created the conditions for them to be able to demonstrate these advanced collaborative problem solving skills and these leadership skills that they couldn't do in other places. And how could I leverage that? And that really got me into my PhD and my work with Dr. Nick Reynolds.
And tell us a little bit about what your research sort of entailed.
Yeah, so the research was looking at, it was a design experiment. And I was so lucky. I was supervised by the late Professor David Clark, Dr. Natasha Zebol, who coordinates the MTeach primary program at Melbourne Graduate School of Education, and Dr. Tony Jones. and we looked at how we could design using data from video observation, but also interviews with students and teaching staff and teaching assistants. How could we design a social capacity building program that met the needs of my students, use the research evidence, but also use their voices to make something meaningful? So I actually went in and worked with my own students, which is quite controversial for research. But my students were very comfortable with me. They were students who were autistic or on the autism spectrum, or that one of my students had diagnosis of Down syndrome. But we're all gamers, all of us. So we wanted to design something that actually used that interest and then use the research to how we could focus on developing a social capacity building program, a social skills program. But there was really something that respected and valued their identities, and something that they had some agency in, and to be able to decide what it looks like and how it runs.
Was there anything in your research that you found that you weren't expecting?
Yes, just how confident my students were at telling me when I was wrong, and that is fantastic. That is wonderful. So I would put to them a hypothesis, and they would tell me, with all the love and respect in the world, how wrong I was, and I think that's fantastic. I had one student. We were doing video modeling, and the idea of saying, well, these are some different ways that you can show how you want to take a turn, and or this is how you can take a turn, or this is how you can ask for help. And I don't remember the precise skill, but one of my students, and we'll call him Link. I'm a massive Legend of Zelda fan, so I'll call this student Link. Link actually realized that, no, this is not what I want to show Matt. This is not in the video. So he got my hand over, I showed him back on the computer, the laptop. They're all sort of sitting around. And Link got my hand over hand, put my hand on the mouse, closed the video window, and then opened up Final Cut Pro, which was the video editing software he knew I used, found in the timeline of the raw footage, and he showed me an example of him using that skill. And after that point, I became much more interested in using video review, where they could show me on the video timeline certain points of interest, and we could talk about it. But they could use that, and isn't that just? I thought that was just, paradigm shifting for me.
Absolutely, that whole idea of learning from the student, and then you obviously having that awareness. This then fits into that bigger picture of looking at outcomes and looking at how we can use this one game session has all of a sudden transformed the way we look at learning and what we can capture in learning. And as a skill, it is so exciting. And tell us, can I now ask, and I'm going to bring something forward to you, what is the future in terms of say digital gaming and apps in schools that you can see happening?
It's growing, it's huge. I think in terms of inclusive gaming, which I've become really interested in, and how like lunchtime esports clubs. Esports are massive. The idea of playing these games together, but making them inclusive environments where you can have players with a range of different needs, can have those needs met, and it's about social connection. And these could be students who have fine motor skill issues, so providing a range of controllers. Or there might be students who have differences in communication and interaction, like the students who identify as autistic or on the autism spectrum, and how we can put different communication supports in place so they can communicate in a way comfortable to them. And I've seen this explosion in this space. And someone who's a real role model of mine is Dr. Kate Ringland in the US. And she's done so much work around inclusive gaming communities. And I'm really excited to be able to hopefully, when the borders reopen, go over and work with her and learn from her on a project we're looking at doing together. So I think that is the inclusive esports lunchtime gaming clubs. We call it virtual playgrounds. But the idea, this is a playground in a virtual space. Like the value of the playground is kids can connect kids can have agency, kids can make friends, and they can feel like they're part of something. I think this is really a bright spot on the future of Australia's education system, is that these clubs are getting bigger and more pervasive. There's more interest in it. And I think it's something that teachers generally support.
And Matt, if, say, parents are listening to this right now and they're really wanting to, they can see that at home their children are really interested in this, but they have little understanding. Is there anything that you would recommend that they read, or are there courses for parents of young people with additional learning needs, so that they can become part of that or understand that, to help them with their engagement or support them in their journey?
Yeah, so there's two places I'd send you, and the first, my area of passion is really around the autistic community, and particularly neurodiverse-led organisations. So there's some wonderful resources available from a group called the I Can Network, which is set up by Chris Varney, who has a lived experience of autism himself, and he really recognised, and it's Chris's story to tell, so maybe he'd be a great future guest for you, but Chris recognised a need for I guess the community to start taking leadership in this space, and rather than being told what they needed, to actually start to become a group that was autistic led and really provide, I guess, supports and resources for teachers and schools around how they can support autistic kids to thrive in their schools. The other is Yellow Ladybugs, which is very similar, set up by a parent who was autistic herself, and she wanted a space for autistic people who identified as being female or girls who were on the autism spectrum. And so that's a really wonderful, inclusive space as well. And those are the two places I've looked at, because the community voice is so strong and there's such a vibrant network there. I would really recommend starting with those two places for autism. For gaming, I don't think you can go past reading some Kate Ringland stuff. If you just go into Google Scholar and type in Kate Ringland, you'll find some really interesting articles.
Well, that's wonderful. And now let's think about the student themselves that may be listening to this, student who's living with autism. What message would you like to send to them, that they're about to finish their final year at school, they're not too sure what to do, and they're interested, they like the gaming, they've thrived on it? What opportunities could they explore possibly if they wanted to take gaming further?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say, I think this is such an important message, is saying that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed.
Okay.
You are whole. That's it. And I think that's something we don't say enough to our kids. And I think, yes, we can all learn. We're all learners. And Ricky, I learned so many. You and I have spoken about this before. I've learned so much. And I've come so far. I look back, and I will continue to learn. We're all lifelong learners. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. And these kids, to recognise that post-schooling can be such an exciting opportunity, because there are so many talented kids out there who, for whatever reason, are taught they're not, or they're told, the system has told them that they're less. And I think if you go to things like the Neurodiversity Hub, which is a really good internship program, and it's got supports for kids going to TAFE and higher education, TAFE or university, it's really linking in. I know I'm closest with the autistic community. If you're linking into those groups that are neurodiverse-led or people with lived experience, disabilities, support, and finding a mentor, someone who's navigated that path, who can look out for you, and someone you can come to with challenges you're facing. Most university staff, most teachers, want to do the right thing, just we don't know how. And so we're learning too. So it's about continual improvement from our end, and trying to make it a better place for all our students, not just those that fit a very narrow definition of what it is to be a student. I think in terms of university life, it's the advice. It's what advice I give to any kid. And I think it's go with what you love. Just go with what drives you and gets you out of bed in the morning. I did year 11. I chose the subjects that my friends did, and it was a slog. And then year 12, I just chose what I loved. I chose literature. I chose, English we had to do, but I loved it. I chose legal studies. I dropped physics. I dropped, chemistry. And it just made such a wealth of difference to and I think continuing that in university, that mindset of choosing what you love and what you really enjoy and what drives you. And then finding something. I know that's a really privileged thing to say. I understand that some people don't have that choice, but build towards that something that you love, I guess, and build from your areas of interest. And don't be discouraged by people saying, "Oh, games, that won't take you anywhere." If you want to study games, go study games. And I think it's the rest of us, society has to make sure kids can do what they love.
Absolutely. And Matt, that's such a wonderful message, and I have to sort of hold myself back from almost crying because it really touched me when those words that really I know came from your heart and they're authentic. Can I just now ask you, for some parents who might be out there maybe struggling a bit with COVID-19 and some young people, especially on the spectrum, how they're coming to terms with this notion of, disease, death. Is there any advice that you could give for parents with kids who might be struggling a bit through this time of routines changing and...
It is. It's really hard because I'm Victorian, Ricky, and I know other states maybe have people watching this around the world, or people in different states may have a different experience. We're up to our 6th lockdown, and it's the yo-yoing from the kids. If you're in school, you're physically located in school, you're online, and you're working online, you're going back to school again, then you're coming out again. It is really hard because it's a break in routine. And that sense of constant anxiety around safety is really difficult for some people. So my advice for parents is that there is a misconception sometimes that kids on the spectrum, but also other kids with lived experiences of disability, rather than neurological difference, they don't need social connection, which is like it comes from an old, antiquated view.
Absolutely, yes.
But finding online spaces, and I would recommend checking out Autcraft. It's a safe space for people with lived experiences and their siblings and allies. It's a safe space for the autistic and neurodiverse community to be able to go on and to be able to connect with other people. And I know I've heard from a lot of people, it's been a way for them to be able to hang out with friends, to be able to meet new people, and to be able to talk about this stuff and their anxieties without feeling judged, without feeling like they're weird or different. And when you can't physically go to someone's house, it's a safe space to be able to have those connections. So Autcraft, it's AUTCRAFT, and it's a Minecraft server, but it's so much more. It's a community.
That's wonderful, and we'll make sure we put that in the links to help people.
Yeah, great.
And it's just wonderful to hear that these wonderful ideas. And I guess I'm going to now quickly throw something at you. Have anyone at all yet developed any apps or anything for students to dealing with COVID that helps it unpack them and manage any anxiety to do with COVID?
I don't know specifically around COVID, but I do know around anxiety. There are a number of apps, and there are things that help people to be able to monitor their state and then have some strategies in place, their emotional state, to be able to address that. And I know there's some interesting work from Diane in positive psychology at the University of Melbourne around this. I've had people on the spectrum report that wearables like Fitbits and Apple Watches with heart rate monitors for them as technology has been really helpful because it helps them to realize when they're heightened or very anxious And then it's having a support person or having some strategies in place that, like I go and I've got a Star Wars Lego set I'm working through at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Having something like that, just a small thing that's very procedural I can work through. It's the mindfulness stuff. Or doing something that's not focused on what's causing the anxiety can really help be a breaker. So in terms of technology, wearables are a really good one for parents. And you don't have to buy an Apple Watch. There's far cheaper options. If I know Apple overcharge for everything, so it's fine. But just having a heart rate monitor and then talking through the student, saying, "Yeah, it's okay. Everyone gets anxious. I know this is a very troubling time. Let's find some things that you can do that help you just be and calm." And then we can go back to doing online schooling, or we can go back to doing whatever needs to be done. And I know I recognise it's not going to solve every problem, but I think just being aware of anxieties at this time is really important.
Dr. Matthew Harrison, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. As a person who personally knows you, I admire you and respect you for the work you've done to help our community and really provide a positive space. Thank you so much. And anyone who's listening, please check out, if you Google Dr. Matthew Harrison, you'll be able to keep up with his work. We'll also put a link to his work. So if anyone wants to link up with him, talk about their research or connect, please do so. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ricky.